right. Is it recording now? Got it. Great. So I'd like to introduce the following alumni, Dr. Lamb, who was in the Department of Geographical Sciences and graduated in 2021. Dr. Safapur, who was in the Department of Government and Politics and graduated in 2021, and Dr. Yuhan Rao, who is also in the Department of Geographical Sciences and graduated in 2019. All BSOS folks, I have to shout it out because I also got my degree in the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences, so it's great to see some of my colleagues here. So today, what we're really going to do is give you all a little bit of time to engage with one another. What part of the hurdle of being online is not being able to have that interaction. And so we wanted to build in a little bit of time for you all to at least introduce yourselves to each other. And we're gonna ask that you just give like a really short elevator pitch of your name, who you are, what your department is, and why you decided to join us today. And then we're going to get into the moderated panel portion. I have some questions that I'm going to pose to the panelists, and we're going to listen to their great responses. And then we wanted to give some time for you all. So while we're going through the moderated portion of the panel, please be thinking of some additional questions you might want to pose to our panelists. So in our breakout rooms, we just like you to say your name, use your pronouns if you'd like, and then again, currently state who you are. Are you a doctoral student? Are you a postdoc? Shout out to the postdocs. And what your program or lab is, and then again, your career interests. And we'd ask that the panelists, while they're in the breakout rooms, if you could just introduce yourself last, that would be great. And then we're gonna come back to the larger session. I hope I have talked enough to give Susan time to create the breakout rooms. Yeah, that's great. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to have this quick conversation, and then we'll bring you back into the large room. Good luck.
Blessing, you were invited to one, but and Tiago was too, so.
No worries. I did not enter.
Each panelist is in their own room, so that's good.
Okay,
good. I don't think there isn't
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's not assigned. Looks like a couple of folks haven't joined, but that's okay. Oops, I need to pause the recording.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a moment to get to know at least one or two other people in your breakout room. We're just going to go ahead and jump in and get started. I am going to pose this first question to everybody, but all the panelists rather, and all of you feel free to answer all the questions. It's very a pretty informal approach that we're using here. So if you have something that you really feel like you want to contribute, please jump in. But our first question is, can you quickly describe the work that you currently do, and what job strategies did you use to land this position? And I'll just go ahead and start with Rachel, as she's to my right on my screen.
Okay, great, thanks. So currently I work for the Maryland Department of the Environment. So it's our state regulatory agency, and I lead the agency's efforts on including natural and working lands, so forest land, ag land, tidal wetlands within our climate mitigation strategies. So that means I am mostly involved in 3 different things. First, I help harness new science and technologies for use to improve our accounting of those benefits, so the carbon benefits towards the climate goals. I chart pathways for inclusion of that science understanding within our existing policy tools. So that's our plan to hit our climate goals and our inventory to account for how well we're doing in any given year. And then I develop new strategies for project engagement with financing and markets. So it's how to build private-public partnerships around those themes. And I got hired in my current job at the end of March, straight out of a science policy fellowship I was doing with the state. So even though I wasn't a state government employee at the time, I was working with them, showing them basically the value of having somebody who could think about these issues, and then they hired me full time. So more on that later, but it was a pretty direct pathway based on the relationships and work I was doing there.
Great to hear that how fellowships can work in your favor. Yuhan, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks, Blessing. And I landed my job through a postdoc. So what I did is that for my dissertation research, I study on how we can leverage satellite data and in situ observations on the climate data set to improve the quality for regional and local climate researchers. And I came across postdoc job posting through a conference connection that I met some of the colleagues who works at my current research institute, and they emailed me of the job posting they have on postdoc, who the job description is basically an extension of my dissertation research. It almost sounds like too perfect to be true, but it happens sometimes. And so I applied for that postdoc, and thanks Susan for helping me with my application package with the cover letter that made it much better. And I landed here at Asheville, North Carolina, did a postdoc with the group for a year and a half, and that's when they started talking about, oh, maybe we should just like hire you as a full-time employee, as an official staff here. I was like, I'm okay with that. And I found a lot of colleagues I really enjoy working with, and I have been supporting a lot of activities that are really exciting and really spur my interest. So that's why I decided to take the job that they created for me as an official staff here.
You know, I love a postdoc story, so thank you so much for that. And last but not least, Alana, and please correct me if I mispronounced your name.
Oh, sure, that's fine. Hi, I'm Alana Safapur. I just got my PhD in 2021 in government politics. I'm a political scientist and pollster. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School and a visiting postdoctoral fellow at Northeastern University's Network Science Institute. And in addition to kind of my placement as a postdoctoral fellow at those institutions, I work on what's called the COVID States Project, which is a multi-state or a 50-state survey of attitudes, behaviors, and opinions related to the COVID-19 pandemic, which, you know, at this point, everything is related to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a little fun. We recently did a bunch of work looking at attitudes towards critical race theory, which, you know, obviously a little tangentially related to the pandemic, but still quite interesting. So my research generally is focused on creating better citizens. My dissertation was an original theory of prejudice reduction and its impact on political attitudes. So I create engaging online interactive simulations to reduce racial prejudice. My focus is on anti-Black racism, and study the impact on political attitudes and post-test measures, so things like support for affirmative action, and et cetera. I also do a lot of work in encouraging voting, as well as attitudes of racial and ethnic minorities about politics and public health. So I ended up in this position with a kind of odd route. I was the 2020 polling fellow at the Washington Post. So I was working on polling the American public about the 2020 presidential election and coincidentally the COVID-19 pandemic, because I started in March 2020. And I did that for a year while I was still a PhD student. And my fellowship ended, and the Kaiser Family Foundation, which also does a lot of work on public health, needed kind of an extra set of hands. And I was referred to them from my colleagues at the Washington Post. So I ended up doing that. And again, this was just like an on the side thing. I was just trying to finish up my PhD. And while I was working with the Kaiser Family Foundation, they saw the call for a postdoctoral fellow for this position and said, oh, you have to apply for this. This would be great. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here.
Your work sounds fascinating. I also from government and politics, so not to insert myself too much, but also it's so great to hear how networks really help guide this process. And I'm sure that some of the upcoming questions are going to hit on that a little bit more. But we want to get to know a little bit more about what you do on a daily. So what are some of the skills that are most important in the work that you do every day? And how did your doctoral training prepare you, or maybe didn't quite prepare you for that? Jump in.
Sure. Well, my dissertation really was focused actually on carbon accounting in forests, specifically how that improved carbon accounting could help with Maryland state policy. So I was strategically trying to include within very science-based, a traditional approach, asking a rigorous science question and using, data and tools to help kind of test that question and come up with some, answers that could continue to inform decision making, really trying to better integrate that into like policy application. Sometimes that can be hard depending on the program you're in or if you're wearing a STEM hat. So I was trying to do that in my dissertation, and that gives me a lot of insight into sort of the science landscape for answering these kinds of questions that I'm now responsible for doing or leading around. But my job isn't just like my specific, niche that I looked at in my dissertation. It's now expanding to multiple types of land groups, multiple ways of thinking about carbon and other environmental outcomes. So I have to still be good at research and analysis. If I don't know the answer to something, I got to be able to go educate myself. So doing a lot to read, to talking to other experts, and then actually have to in turn present myself as often the expert that people are looking to internally to help answer questions related to this much bigger topic. So research and analysis is also a key part of my job still, but tons of other soft skills. So in that kind of political context, relationships and networking is critical. I need to know who's who. I need to know how they relate to each other. I need to understand externally who's relating to the agencies in terms of nonprofit actors, businesses. Like I need to know, the landscape, and I have to kind of keep a pulse on who's talking about these topics. So that whole skill of building relationships and networking is a lot in this job. I also have to be good at concisely writing and good at public speaking, because I often am asked to represent the agency's interests in these topics at all sorts of different levels. It could be in front of like a independent political commission context, or it could be talking to the senior citizen retirement community about how they could plant trees. So being versatile and taking this like clear breadth of knowledge you've been developing expertise around and making it accessible to multiple audiences in a pretty adaptive way. And then last thing I'll say is because this is an advocacy themed panel, I actually often have to play the role internally as an advocate. So I have to think about pitching to our administration and our leaders like new ideas or positions or approaches. Sometimes we see government as like this slow moving kind of machine, but it's interesting how it's sometimes from an internal perspective, if you're in the right role, you can, you might have some ability to shape some of what's happening or different approaches to things, and kind of have to learn how to stick your neck out. So some of those softer skills I think are really important to my day job as well.
Hey, thank you. The networking theme continues.
I can jump in. So for me, I mentioned during a small introduction group that I sit at the intersection between university and government. So I'm with a research institute that is funded by the federal agency. So we are basically a research arm for federal agency trying to promote the value and production of some of the important environmental data sets for environmental research and policy making. So, and I'm also involved in some of the current exciting movements on the data science and artificial intelligence, where we are setting up a new center, National NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence. So within the team, I am in charge of some of the data management as well as the training and workforce development. So I think that speaks to the advocacy part for on the federal side, where government agency often requires some of the advocacy for the resources to do the work that's necessary. And I'm working with a lot of my collaborators on the team, trying to advocate for those resources that's really important and needed. And for my daily work, I do a lot of facilitation on the conversations that between different groups, and also for my own research, trying to demonstrate the value of the things that we're advocating for. So there's another layer of advocacy that it can be advocating for yourself and for your own research oftentimes. Even if you are in a research group or research institution and in a nonprofit organization, you often need to advocate for the work that you're doing and to get the support needed to continue those work. And speaking of the skills I learned, so I think actively working and engaging with groups on campus is also really helpful. That working, I know with BSOS, we have something called Dean's Graduate Student Advisory Council. So I was fortunate to be part of that group and working with members from different departments. And I know Rachel was on the graduate student governments. So working with other departments and college representatives and working with university officials to addressing some of the policy issues concerned to grad students. And I think network, I don't want to emphasize that anymore because I think we are overemphasizing it already, but thinking about things strategically. I mean, everyone doing dissertation research, you always have a plan. So thinking about how you want to achieve that is a really important skill that everyone is practicing, but oftentimes we don't really mention it enough for doing that.
Right. Okay. So a lot of your engagement on campus really did, outside of your research, really did impact how you engage now. Alana?
Yeah, just tagging on to that point that Yuhan made and Rachel made as well, like being strategic in your studies and in your focus, I think is a really, really good piece of advice. It took like probably a very different path than I think a lot of people who get a PhD took. So I came into the PhD program thinking there's no way I want to go into academia. I wanted to get a job as a pollster in a non-academic setting, or as like a researcher at a think tank like Brookings or something. I thought, oh, there's no way I'd want to be a professor. And I actually kind of took the opposite path. And in part, that's because of what my research ended up focusing on. You know, prejudice reduction, like you'd think with the focus in the media and whatnot on these issues, that there would be maybe like a lot of positions for someone who's, you know, an expert in prejudice reduction. But the incentives in academia are very different from the incentives in like the private sector. So, you know, it can be tough to find a job that gives you as much freedom as kind of a pure research oriented position. So that's kind of why I'm pursuing the more academic oriented path. And I still definitely see my work as oriented around advocacy through a very research-oriented lens. That being said, I've always been, I think, more public-facing, and a lot of that has come out of my experiences in the polling world. So, I mean, the University of Maryland and the Department of Government and Politics in particular just has incredible opportunities for getting hands-on polling experience and training. The Joint Program and Survey Methodology, also in BSOS, is a partnership between the University of Maryland and the University of Michigan, and it's, produced a lot of the, most widely recognized pollsters in the country, including Scott Clement, the polling director at the Washington Post and former director at ABC News. So getting a chance to work with him through opportunities that the University of Maryland gave me was really critical for kind of the work I'm doing now and sort of developing the skills that I'm kind of using every day on my job. The COVID States Project, where we don't just write academic papers, we also write a series of public-facing reports that are going directly to people who are making public health policy across the US. So governor's offices, state legislatures. We do a lot of interviews with the media, which is one thing I wasn't exactly ready for, to be perfectly honest. I kind of didn't expect that part of my job, but it's a really important skill to have, even if I think you do become a professor, because you want to get your research findings out there to the people that really matter for implementing them. So people in government in particular, and private advocacy organizations who, might implement your recommendations. So when it comes to encouraging voting or, reducing prejudice, I think those are really important. I should also say that in encouraging voting work in particular, and this is just, maybe a little bit too specific, but academic researchers have a long history of partnering with the sort of people on the ground. So like my first project in graduate school was partnering with the states of Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Washington to encourage residents of their states who were eligible but unregistered to vote to go ahead and get registered and actually go on to vote in the 2016 presidential election. And, state board of elections are incredibly wonderful and hardworking people. And, they want every eligible citizen to have their voice heard. And, they worked with myself and Professor Mike Hamner and with support from the Pew Research Center to send out millions upon millions of postcards to encourage people to register and vote. And it was effective. So, there's a lot of great people in government, as evidenced by, my other panelists, who care about research-oriented behavior and findings. And yeah, so I've had the pleasure of working with some of them, and I think there's a lot of great positions in government too for careers in advocacy and also partnerships.
Thanks for highlighting that. I think that's something that sometimes we have a panel on federal government, but this panel has turned out to be a panel on government to a certain extent. So yes, government is not all bad. I do want to give a moment for folks in the audience, which is interesting to say that on Zoom. But folks, if you have any questions, feel free to just unmic or unmute and ask your question. And if not, I have more, don't worry. All right, great. So I will move on to the next one. What are some of the job titles that new graduates should be applying to if they want to do this kind of work? And are there some professional associations or maybe different organizations that you might encourage people to look at?
Just jump.
Yeah.
I'm just jumping in because I think the title can be really diverse. I know, like, even within different organizations. For me, I'm a research scientist, and that's a blanket name for all those people in a research institute. But sometimes you'll find those job titles like policy analysts, and also some may even have data in it. So it's like data analyst or something. So that can be one. So I would say looking at the job description rather than the job title oftentimes, and that can be hard just because there's so many like job postings that's out. I know Susan, I saw Susan's laughing, but Susan always like teaches us that pay attention to what has been put into the job description and your job responsibilities, and pairing your like package to those descriptions that they're looking at. And I know we don't have any federal panel this year, but USA job is completely different story. Sometimes the description can be really broad, then you need to read into the fine notes to understand what they're looking for. But in case of the engagements and networks, a lot of professional societies are paying attention to the advocacy and science policy related topics. So the two that I'm mostly close with is the American Geophysical Union and American Meteorological Society. They all have specific science policy program. So they work with the community, with policymakers, and develop fellowships and policy statements. So those are the groups you want to affiliate yourself with and to engage with them. They often have student and early career opportunities like fellowships that Rachel may have mentioned. And there are specific, if we are talking about science policy, there's specific science policy community that they are like really active, and for different states and nationwide, and they're also international specific. So I think starting with your own professional society, and if you don't find the group that really do the things that you want, and then go to some more like national policy focusing the groups. I'm sure some other panelists will have other advice as well.
Yeah, my pathway to my job is kind of funny because I find state government titles and tracks sometimes are completely confusing. You're like, what does a natural resource planner for do? It's like, I don't know. So before I got this job, as Doug was highlighting, I was in a Maryland Sea Grant State Science Policy Fellowship. That was its name. And so the whole intention of the fellowship was to place early career PhDs within the context of a state agency at a leadership level. So you could basically have mentorship from those kind of at that management level, and then kind of show the value of having somebody who's trained, with a PhD, but can actually integrate some of that into like policy formation and practice, right? And in some places that's a given and people welcome that. And in other places, like at certain levels, people think, isn't a PhD just like, like, are they going to just be in a book, lost in a book or lost in their research and not know how to translate what they're doing in that context? So the fellowship, I think that's just one example of many that I think Doug is talking about, sometimes helps elevate the role of recent PhDs into the right context so that people can see you at work and can see in practice what the value of it is. So I'm actually a political appointee, because what happened is they said, we want to keep you. So they created a political appointee position within the office of the secretary. And so my title is like, my actual title is like a class. It's like designated administrative manager, which you're like, that's kind of crazy. Like, what does that mean? So functionally, it's how you describe, what is a management level position actually allowing you to do? And then the things I told you that I get to work on is what, you get support from the administration at the right management level to have the influence. So sometimes, in my case, it was a little bit like showing the need for a position that was created. And so the actual title was less important than the level of influence that position had to inform the kind of outcomes that we're hoping to get. So sometimes if you're looking for positions, understanding where they sit in the org chart can sometimes be helpful, of just understanding, like, if you're interested in management or administration, for example, how far are you away from that? Who's your supervisor? Or if you're, not interested in that, maybe there's a different track you want to be on, so that if you keep working your way up in the context of state government, you pick the right lane. So it can be really highly dependent, of course, on the place, but I think sometimes imagining what your influence is in the position that you're getting can be another way of looking at the role.
Yeah, I think I probably have the least interesting thing to add on this front. I mean, if you're looking for a postdoc, look for postdoctoral fellowships. If you're interested in going into academia, I'm applying for like assistant professor jobs on the tenure track, and there's like some research science positions as well. In terms of polling jobs, survey statistician, public opinion specialist, sort of things like that. I think my title at KFF was survey statistician, and my title at the Washington Post was like polling fellow, something like that.
Sounds like all of you had some sort of fellowship opportunities, though. So kind of highlighting what Rachel said is it's an opportunity to have some sort of financial support also, which is nice, but to be able to highlight the skills that you have in real time to potentially an organization that might want to bring you on, or maybe in Alana's case, an organization that might put you in touch with another organization that does bring you on. So thank you so much for that feedback. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the chat. Don't do that.
Oh, sorry, can I just add one thing? So with like the fellowships, I mean, in my case at least, it didn't just like happen from zero for me. I mean, I didn't go from like my first year in grad school to like, polling for the Washington Post, because that's impossible. I started out in sort of like targeted RA positions, and I did like a lot of coursework, and I had to apply and whatnot. So think of it like in terms of stepping stones. Like use the resources that Maryland has to offer to get to the point where you can be competitive for these positions, and then that will cause you to be really competitive for the position that you ultimately want career-wise.
Yeah, I think Rachel probably I should let Rachel talk about it, but like Rachel was member of the science policy student club, I believe, or like you are involved in that. So if you're interested in science policy, Maryland has that group. So they did some of the activities, which I'm not sure. I have been out of Maryland for like 3 years, so I'm not sure what they're doing right now, but I think the group started during my last year there. And so Rachel wrote some essays on science policy and published it, I believe. So which is really exciting activities that recently have emerged on campus at Maryland.
Do you know if they're still active, Rachel?
Yeah, they're still registered, and they still had some leadership work. Yeah, they're called Graduate Science Policy at UMD. So you should be able to look at them up as a registered graduate student organization, but they're affiliated with the National Science Policy Network as like a student affiliated group, and they have a pretty broad coverage of science. So you might be interested in checking them out.
Thank you so much for that. So for people who are still here, start thinking about ways you might be able to continue working if you're already doing some advocacy work, but working with others and being able to network with your colleagues here on campus. I did get a question in the chat that I'll just pose. We had quite a bit of conversation yesterday about not only job titles, but also salaries. I don't know if you all are comfortable kind of talking about how did you approach salaries? How did you approach negotiating your salary if possible? And maybe giving some tips to those who are trying to get a better understanding of what they can be expecting.
Well, my fellowship did not pay very well. And I actually think they should have paid more, and I made that clear. But I still chose to take it. And one of the reasons I chose to take it because it was time limited. It was a 1-year fellowship. It opened up new relational opportunities with people who, you know, I think it was the right people. There's a good match between who my potential mentors would be, the people who were my supervising, and I think what I wanted to learn from them and what I thought I could offer. And it was doing the work I care a lot about. So there was a mesh for me. And so I chose to take it knowing, again, it was low, guys. It was like $40,000. That's not, that's not competitive. It's low, but I chose to take it. And then when the opportunity came up to roll into this full-time position at state government, just like federal government, they have different levels, right? Like GS pay scales and steps. And to be honest, it's a little challenging to actually figure out where you fit, because it's HR looking at your CV or your resume and fitting you. So that's important. As a side note, learning how to convert your CV to a resume and making sure you're capturing all that you have to offer is really important, because you know they have their own metric for how they're trying to fit you in their scale. So you don't always know, but making sure you can really capture everything that you're offering is really important. In my case, I also had my supervisor, who was the assistant secretary. She was helping me say, like, look, what would be a competitive position? So for example, the federal AAAS, federal science policy fellowships, working in the federal government with people with generally equivalent level skills and experience, was they're paying people between $80,000 and $100,000. Take this range, and we'll go back. When we're going back to talk to HR, we'll say, look, she could get hired, you know, in DC for this amount in this range. Let's see what we can do. And so I had some support internally to help me know like where I should be hitting. And she kind of helped us figure out how to narrow that range, like within what state government could do realistically. But advocating for me at a position, like I mentioned before, the right level position, and then connecting it with an equivalent level pay scale was what landed me somewhere way better than $40,000 within that range. So for me, you know, it was part of that. It was part of like knowing equivalent level positions and knowing that private sector is just always going to pay differently than public sector jobs. So if you can scale your expectation, but still advocate for your value and your worth, if you have somebody helping to guide you, you can land, I think, in a pretty fair position. It's my experience anyway.
Yeah, I think research, like Susan put in there, like researching the salary range is also, it's really important, not just for the job posting you're looking at, and also the relevant job pay grade. For example, if you're within public institution like Maryland, that you can all find those like salary history on Baltimore Sun or somewhere, that you can use that as baseline to compare what's they may offer you, or what are the possibilities that you can get. And when it goes to the private organizations like nonprofits or foundations, or even the private industries, that can be tricky to figure out, just because those organizations usually don't publish those information. So what you have to do is to, through those informational interview and networking, to ask somebody who are comfortable sharing the range with you. So an example that I can share with you is that I ran into a neighbor of my friend through another common friend. It's a tongue twister. And so we started talking, and she is working remotely for a nonprofit doing social science research on policy and international developments. And so she is really open that she's got paid at the government scale. So basically the organization said, yeah, you have PhD, we pay you GS 12. So the starting salary range is really high for nonprofits. Not all the nonprofits have that pay level. So be comfortable asking others. So the worst case scenario is that they'll just say, no, I'm not comfortable sharing that information. But you can ask them more diplomatically. So I have this number. Do you think it's lower or higher than that? So there are different ways you can ask. You don't need to ask them to give you a specific number of how they made for that year. And one more things about negotiation. So I recently went through the negotiation of my salary. So I did some research of like how my job title paid at relevant institutions, and then the cost of living from where I live right now and the other groups. And just like, look, the offer you made comparing the cost of living, it doesn't really make sense. So like we should talk about the raise and other benefits. So I was successful to get like 5% raise of my starting salary, and they took off some of the responsibility in the original job description, just like we can add that back on and give you additional raise when that's in the future, that we can talk about that. So it's like, yeah, that sounds fair. So we met in the middle of what I had been asking for. So reduce certain job responsibility and a certain amount of raise. So it's really uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's also really important conversation to have, just because that's the one shot opportunity you will get. Because after you get into the job, either you have to seek a new position or get a retention offer. Otherwise, it will be hard to get a really like big amount of raise for that. And well, for the National Postdoc Association, I think they recently did a webinar training on the negotiating for your job offers. I believe the recording is public, so everyone can go look it up to see if that's available to you. And Maryland is MPA affiliated member institution, so Maryland should be able to give the access to the postdoc populations to those resources.
Yes, we are institutional members for the National Postdoc Association. Alana, did you have anything to add?
Sure. So, you know, it's always worth it to try, especially like before you accept. I feel like your negotiating power is best before you actually accept the job, especially if you have like another job offer that you can tell them about, which is was the position that I was in while I was deciding whether to accept this postdoc position here. I had a tenure track job offer at Marymount University outside of DC. I will say, this is like the big trade-off when it comes to academic jobs. I mean, there are very few academic jobs that pay incredibly well. I mean, this can differ a little bit based on your field, but, government and the private sector in general, I think pays better. For postdocs, so my postdoc, like it's paid out of like a National Science Foundation grant, so there wasn't really much room for wiggle room. That being said, I did get Harvard to invest almost $6,000 like in my research, which sounds like a lot, but it's not actually a lot because surveys are extraordinarily expensive. But that supplement definitely helped kind of sweeten the deal for me personally. But yeah, I mean, if you want to make like really good money, probably don't go into academia.
Thanks. I mean, I think a lot of us know that. But it is true that there are trade-offs, right? And that's something that we talked quite a bit about yesterday in our academia panel. And I'm sure with advocacy work, it's similar. I want to be really mindful of time because we're coming up on 3 o'clock. So we want to just end the panel with each panelist giving us one piece of advice for a career or job search that you would like to give to our attendees. Like, what is something you wish you knew when you were ready to graduate and thinking about your career?
I can get started. It's not necessarily the things I wish I know, but it's more the advice that I have always been trying to follow is be flexible and don't say no to the opportunities that may not in your original plan. So always, I really enjoy taking an improv class with Linda from the Writing Center. Do you remember last year? So the yes and principle in improv is always really helpful for making a lot of decisions I'm making right now. Just like don't say no to the things and the curveballs people may have throwing at you, that you never know how that may actually turns out to be an opportunity for you in the future.
I think, you know, you learn a lot about what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, what your skills are, what your interests are in. And it might not be that every job holds all of those things, but I would keep pushing to hold those things together for you, those things that you care most about. Because like for me, my story is like I always wanted to integrate science and policy, and I wanted to do it like together. I didn't want to have only science. I didn't want to have only policy. I wanted to do it together. And there's that in some spaces that's new. So like pushing and taking advantage of opportunities like Doug said, but then showing or demonstrating that value that you think you bring, whatever that might be for you, and keep pushing for that sometimes opens up doors that like there wasn't a position for me to apply to, but I now have the opportunity to keep doing it. And so it might not have worked out that way. But I think if you know what you really love and you see an opportunity or you see a way that like you think you can uniquely impact something, keep going. Like people will see your passion, they'll see the skills that you're bringing. So keep pushing towards that, even if like there's not this perfect position out there that you can directly apply to, because you never know what might happen.
Sure. Yeah, those are both really good pieces of advice. Mine is similar, although it's not actually my advice. It's something Dr. Cornel West said. He said, you know, America needs people who have the capacity and the drive to reimagine and remake our country. And basically what I've just always taken that to mean is that, you know, being a patriot or loving your country really means like pushing it forward and trying to make it better. And, you know, whatever career you end up in, if you just keep that in mind and try to leave this place a little bit better than you found it, you know, our children and our grandchildren will be all the better for it. And you got a great education because you got it from Maryland. So you definitely have the capacity.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And I'm so glad to know that all three of you are doing that in your work on a daily basis, pushing us forward and making us a better place. So I'm so looking forward to seeing some of you in the audience again tomorrow. And I just want to thank all three panelists for their time here today and their wonderful advice. We so appreciate our wonderful alums. So yay for you. I'll do a real hand clap and then also a good old emoji hand clap. We will see you all tomorrow, hopefully.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Blessing. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks so much.